it's 1976, the summer of 76. I'm not ordained yet. I'm a mitra. And I'm on a long summer retreat. It's a 3-week summer retreat, open retreat. It's in a wonderful retreat venue. It's a Sufi retreat centre in the south of England. And Nagabodhi is leading the whole 3-week retreat. And the theme is metta. So you sort of imagine this setting with all these young people in this room, in a beautiful setting, and it's sweltering hot, and we're practicing metta. After about a week, Nagabodhi says, well, you're all at a stage now where you're beginning to experience a lot more energy because you've been meditating and you haven't been kind of frittering your energy away. So don't just blow it. Just keep on ploughing your energy into your meditation. And I'm booked for 2 weeks. So I'm, right, okay, carry on. And then part of the way into the second week, he says, now I've got a special announcement to make. He said, in the third week, Bhante is going to be coming to the retreat and he's going to be ordaining someone. Now, I had already been to an ordination. Back in February of that year, I'd met Bhante in person for the first time, just at a weekend ordination retreat where a Nomar was being ordained. I was already living in community with a Nomar. So I had said hello to him. I'd met him in that sense. But I must have been keen to see another ordination because it felt like momentous. It's like, wow, how can I miss this? So basically, I just decided I'm going to stay on this retreat. I'm not going to go back to work. I'm just going to stay. So anyway, move into the third week. We're still doing metta practice, quite a lot of it. And Bhante comes, and Gunavati was ordained then. She was a Finnish woman, and I can't say I really remember anything about it. What stood out for me was there was this question-answer session with Bhante, and we were all sitting on the floor in this big room, and people were asking questions of him, and he's just sitting there cross-legged on an armchair, I think, sitting in an armchair. Anyway, someone says, so why is it in the Metta Bhavana we have this first stage, for self, like what's that about? And basically Bhante then spoke at length about why it was important to cultivate a healthy self-love. And in my memory of it and my experience at the time, it was as if he just went on and on and on about it. Maybe he didn't, but it felt like he was speaking, a good 10 minutes or so. He just went on and on about it. And at a certain point, it was a bit like the penny dropping. It was a bit like, God, he really means this, it's really important to love yourself. It's a bit like, there I'd been on this retreat, doing this Metta Bhavana for like these weeks, and I'm sure Nagabodhi had given us good instructions, but it's a bit like, I hadn't quite registered that the first stage actually was like crucial. And that had a huge effect on me as a young person who, had been through a kind of not great conditioning in my early schooling and, probably wasn't very aware that I didn't have a healthy self-view, but clearly I didn't. And this really was so helpful to hear, because I'd only been meditating about a year at that point. It was just so valuable to realise this is a really important part of this practice. Give it attention and learn how to do this. So in November 1976, Bhante is giving his series of lectures on the Sutra of Golden Light. I think they're at Hampstead Town Hall. Yes, they're at Hampstead Town Hall. So there's a whole bunch of us who are living in these squats in North London, and we walk across Hampstead Heath every week to the Hampstead Town Hall, and then we walk back in the evening. It's dark, and we're coming back across the heath, and it's quite magical, really, with the stars and the dark and the twinkling lights of London. Anyway, when he gave the lecture on the significance of confession, which is the heart of that sutra. Now, for one thing, that was the first sutra I ever read from front to back. It made absolutely no sense to me, the Sutra of Golden Light, and I certainly hadn't realised that the confession chapter was like the whole key of the whole sutra. It completely passed me by. So for one thing, it was like Bhante's elucidation of that sutra was a revelation. The way he kind of pulled out what it was getting at, what it was actually trying to communicate to us, which, I mean, you know, I'd read it as a story, but I didn't get any teachings from it, but he was giving those teachings. But that confession one was what really catapulted me into kind of having the courage to go up to him after the lecture and say, I'd really like to meet you, have a one-to-one personal interview with you. So that happened quite soon after that request. So I was invited to go and meet him at what was then the building site of Sukhavati, which became the London Buddhist Centre. And it was quite surreal because, you know, you kind of walked in to this burnt-out fire station that was a wreck, full of scaffolding, holes in walls, wires hanging down randomly, you name it. And you're sort of being taken up these stairs, and somewhere on the first floor this door is opened. And then you walk into this completely altered reality, which is this very nice, quite small room, but beautifully decorated with Morris print curtains, wallpaper and furnishing, you know, fabric furnishings, all covered with a very fine veneer of plaster dust. And there's Bhante sitting there, and I'm there with him on my own, and I've got 20 minutes. You know, so we talk about all sorts of things, which I don't remember now, particularly what they were about. But about halfway through, or maybe 2/3 of the way through the interview, I said to Bhante, I've got a particular question I want to put to you. Now, it's the sort of question that these days you just ask in a beginner's class and that would be that. But I mean, it wasn't like that in those days. I mean, there weren't people to ask basic questions of. So I basically said to him, you know, I've been doing the mindfulness of breathing, but I don't seem to find it, I'm finding it really difficult to concentrate. So he looked at me and he said, well, we've been sitting here talking for some time, and as we're sitting here, I get a sense there's only half of you here with me, talking to me. And there's a little gap, and it was like, okay. And then he kind of said, well, actually, I'd say there's only a quarter of you here, talking to me. Another little gap. And then he said, in fact, I'd go so far as to say, there's only a 1/10 of you here, talking to me. And very soon, you know, that's all he said, and that was enough. And as he said it, I could just feel a bit like I was dropping more and more into this felt sense that actually there was just that much of me sitting in that room with him. Anyway, not long after that, there was a little tap on the door, and this guy who I knew, who was a mitra, called Graham, now Hasha Prabha, put his head round the door, and it was a bit like, that's the end of the interview. So Bhante stood up, I stood up, and at that point, you know, he just kind of, he was very, you know, he'd said these things which were really like dropping a bombshell into my psyche. And then he said something really encouraging, like, well, you know, if you just keep practicing, enlightenment will come. It was akin to that. It probably, you know, it was something like that he said to me. And I could feel this little voice saying, yes. You know, it's a bit, I could really feel there's so little of me really behind all this, you know, though I want to be behind it. Anyway, the interview ended, left, you know, Graham showed me out of the building, and I was sort of walking down the road, the Roman road to the bus stop. And I just began to feel absolutely furious. I just thought, who the hell's he? He doesn't know me from a bar of soap. How dare he speak to me like rank, you know. Anyway, by the time I got to the bus stop, you know, I thought, oh, okay, you're angry. He's obviously touched on something here. And it was very useful having the long bus ride home, because basically I calmed down and I just felt, yeah, okay, he's put his finger on something. I don't know what I can do about it, but he's touched something. Anyway, I got home and I was living in this squat community with my 2 Kalyana Mitras, Dharmadina and Anoma, and I you know, told them what had happened, and they said, you should be honoured that he spoke to you like that. He doesn't do that with everybody in their first interview. And then there was another Mitra living in this community with me. And anyway, it became a bit of a joke because basically she took it upon herself to try and help me free up my 9/10. So there was this joke that went on about, oh, we've got to help Christine free up her 9/10. And I mean, the main way that was happening with this particular Mitra friend was, I mean, it was like quite crude, really. She'd basically try and be as provocative as possible to really get me going in a particular way. And I mean, my Kalyana Mitras, in a way, I think they just felt, oh God, they're like kids, and they were just like, really didn't want to kind of get into it. But I have to thank this Mitra because it did do something. I began to, what in Bhante's language would say, unblock one's energy. I was a bit blocked, emotionally blocked. And the energy started to break out. And anyway, it must have done something because basically 6 months later, Bhante ordained me. And I'm sure it wasn't because 9/10 of that energy had been liberated, but probably at least 1 more tenth had been liberated. Enough had been freed up a bit more that he had confidence that, you know, if I was ordained, I'd probably stick the course and not just chuck it all in, because so little of me was really kind of behind it. I'm not sure what year it was. It was quite early in my order life. I mean, maybe around 1980. So Bhante was holding, you know, he'd conduct these seminars on different Buddhist texts, and a lot of those seminars he did with men. Well, there were more men in the order, more men Mitras, so in a way it's perfectly understandable that he did more seminars with men. But he definitely did seminars with the women as well. So it would be women, order members and Mitras would be invited up to Padmaloka, and he'd conduct a seminar with them. And so there was a whole bunch of us who'd gone up there, and he was basically doing 2 different. He'd do a morning seminar with one bunch of women and an afternoon seminar with another bunch of women. So he worked jolly hard on those retreats himself. Anyway, in the group I was in, one of the Mitras happened to be in the Mitra study group I was leading in London at the London Buddhist Centre. And I found this Mitra very difficult to work with in a group. I found her way of expressing herself quite convoluted. I often really couldn't understand what it was she was trying to get at when she said things. And it really, I was really struggling with my patience with her and my ability to make sense of what she was wanting to say. Anyway, there she was in this group with Bhante, and he was just she wasn't any different with him than she was in the group with me. It was just, however she was as a character or her conditioning. And he was just so incredibly kind and patient. And I was watching him in that group, and I just learned so much about what it meant to guide people through a text. And the kindness and the patience was, outstanding compared to where I was at as a study group leader. But it was also that he didn't get lost in what she was saying. He'd listen. And it was quite complex and convoluted, but somehow within all that, he would always manage to pick something out, draw something out that she'd said, and either comment on it or ask her a question back or invite us to comment. And again, that was just really interesting, that, the art of being able to somehow take in, but let stuff wash through you if someone is speaking a lot, but you identify something they're getting at, or you intuit what they're getting at, and then you can make something of it. And that was just so helpful for me as a new order member, not really with any training in study leading, and certainly with this particular Mitra. So it was a very helpful experience. Yeah.